I had a lot of calls into my office this week and emails about an exchange that happened in the House of Commons between a former colleague of mine, Tony Clement, and former police chief and now Minister of Nothing, Liberal MP Bill Blair. And the exchange that happened was my former colleague, Tony, asked Bill Blair about whether or not the Liberals were planning a firearms ban and or a seizure of firearms from those in Canada who have obtained their firearms legally through our very restrictive and very heavily regulated firearms ownership laws in Canada. So many of you have asked me about this and what happened and is it true and what's going on. So I don't know where Tony got his information from, and so I'm always very careful about putting out things like this without knowing what information was there to back it up. But I did watch the exchange, and I was concerned about the fact that Bill Blair didn't shut it down. He didn't say, hey, nope, we're not planning on doing that whatsoever. No credibility to this whatsoever. Nope, we're not doing that. That is not what he said. So, I am a little concerned about that, more than a little concerned, because we know that whenever the Liberals, this Liberal government specifically, gets into hot water, they bring up the issue of a firearm ban in Canada. And this of course goes back to when Justin Trudeau was in India, and he had a lot of terrible press around that particular trip. That was the first time we really started seeing the handgun ban on legally obtained firearms in Canada trotted out. Now, I want to stop here, as I always do, and say that the firearms debate in Canada is not the same as the United States, because our laws are entirely and completely different. And also, anybody who legally owns a firearm in Canada, I think anybody in Canada wants to prevent firearms violence and reduce it to zero. So today I read an article, and it was actually a CBC article. The title of it was Black Market Guns, Where They're Coming From and How They Are Getting into the Hands of Criminals. And in fact, in this article, the current Toronto police chief was quoted as saying, gun violence is getting worse. There's more access to firearms. We have to look at the problem from a bigger perspective. And why? Because we know that a vast majority of firearms violence in Canada comes from where? Firearms that are illegally obtained. And a majority of those are illegally obtained by smuggling in, specifically from the United States. So, on one hand, you've got Bill Blair not shutting down a question which he should be able to shut down pretty easily if there's no intent on doing it, about whether or not the Liberals are planning on seizing firearms that are obtained legally through a very rigorous process in Canada. And I'm not going to repeat that process here because I've done many videos on it. I am a firearms owner. I obtained those legally. I'll just say very quickly, it took me over a year to legally obtain a firearm in Canada, and I am subject to very strict regulations on what I can use those firearms for, under what circumstances, how I transport them, how I store them. Not the same as it is in the United States, but park that for a second. So on one hand, we've got him refusing to shut that down, but on the other hand, we've got the CBC writing an article quoting the current Toronto police chief, stating that the issue in Canada is illegal firearms, but the Liberal government are doing nothing to deal with that issue. So what do we need to do? Well, first of all, my party, myself, my colleagues, we've been working the entirety of this parliament to shut down bills like Bill C-71, which does nothing to prevent firearms-related violence in Canada, but does everything to, really punish people in Canada who own firearms legally. And Statistics Canada even shows that people that fall into that category are less likely to commit firearms-related violence. We've been trying to shut that down. In fact, our party leader, Andrew Scheer, has said that he would scrap and reverse Bill C-71 should he come into power in fall, and he also said that he would reverse a handgun ban. But we've also been actively fighting this legislation and this perception in the House of Commons through things like many different petitions. Thank you guys so much. Many of you are among the tens of thousands of people that have signed these petitions. So thank you for raising your voice, even if you don't own a firearm in Canada, for saying, hey, I would like to stop firearms related violence in Canada, but this is not the way to do it. Thank you to all of you who have done that. But also Conservative colleagues in the Senate have been working very hard to ensure that legislation like this doesn't pass, because what do we need? We need stronger legislation to prevent firearms from being smuggled into Canada, harsher penalties for people who do that. We need to ensure that the RCMP has resources to stop illegal firearms smuggling, to crack down on gang violence, which is where a lot of firearms related violence happens right now. And we need to make sure that, the Liberals passing bills like Bill C-75, that's their omnibus justice bill that would water down penalties for crimes like this, that needs to stop as well too. So you can also check out our party leader Andrew Scheer has presented a very big policy platform on what he would do in all of these things. He did that several months ago. We've already been pushing that stuff. So that is where the debate needs to be. Now, is Justin Trudeau going to do this? The thing that Tony Clement laid out in the House of Commons? I don't know. But because Bill Blair didn't shut it down, and because every time we see the Liberals get into hot water, and they've certainly been in hot water over the last few months, the SNC-Lavalin issue, now this week the Mark Norman decision, they changed they try to change the channel by trying to import a firearms debate from the United States of America, as opposed to looking at how we prevent firearms violence in Canada in the Canadian context. And that's cheap politics. And I never put cheap politics past Justin Trudeau. So I think it's important for all of you to call this week, if you care about this issue, Liberal members of Parliament, because it'll be their caucus, especially their rural caucus, who care about ensuring that there isn't a firearm seizure in Canada. And that's the best thing that you can do this week. Certainly, we're going to continue all the things working on all the things I talked about. There's only about 5 weeks left of Parliament in the 42nd Parliament before we go into the summer, and then, of course, into the writ period for a fall election. So, obviously, to be very clear, the Conservative Party of Canada, we don't support any sort of action. Seizing legally obtained firearms, of course we don't support that. Of course we have to fight that because for so many reasons, but simply, the Liberals can't use preventing firearms violence as a fig leaf for that type of atrocious behavior. Because we know that the data shows that that's not going to solve the problem, as was outlined in a CBC article of all places today. So I hope that answers some of your questions on this issue. Thanks to those of you who wrote into my office about it. The best thing that you can do, as I said, is call a Liberal member of Parliament and tell them how you feel about this issue in a respectful way, because that helps us as opposition fight Justin Trudeau in the House of Commons. Working hard for you. Have a great day.